Hi, it's Penny here, and today I wanted to share with you all the book series that I decided to DNF, to stop reading in 2023, so last year. So maybe you can avoid picking up these series, or maybe not avoid picking them up entirely, because some of these I do still think are worth trying or starting, but maybe not worth finishing. And of course, everyone's got different tastes, so even if I don't think a book series is worth continuing, maybe it will still sound like one that you might want to try out. So I do have 15 series that I DNF'd, so there's a lot to get through, mostly fantasy. Actually, I think they're all fantasy of some type or another. So let's get into it. Firstly, we have Tiger and Dell by Jennifer Roberson. This is a book series where I think it started in like 1986 or something. I didn't get to it until about the early 2000s, but that's still quite a long time ago. And the series, I think, very quickly got up to about 4 books, and then there's been quite big gaps between the books since then, and book 8 was just released in 2022, and the author has said that she thinks she probably will write more books in this series with these characters. I don't know if that's necessary, and that's the main reason I'm thinking of DNFing this series. I think as well I'm gonna order this list from ones I'm least likely to follow through on the DNF to ones I'm most likely to follow through, because I'm really bad at DNFing things. So sometimes I say I'm going to DNF things and then I actually end up continuing them. But if you see me continuing this series, make me justify my decision. So this series, basically we follow Tiger, who was this slave that won his freedom by fighting a sand tiger. It kind of lives in this desert land where everyone's very sexist and it's quite a gritty and brutal place. Then we have Delilah, who comes down from the north where it's all snowy, and she is trying to find her brother that's been kidnapped, and she asks for Tiger to help. Then Dell schools Tiger on how sexist he is being, because she and Tiger are both sword dancers, or they call them sword singers in the north. So they're very experienced and skilled sword fighters. Tiger doesn't really believe that a woman could be a sword fighter. So throughout this, Tiger goes on quite a big feminist journey, and it's such a good journey to watch. However, by the time we get up to the 8th book, like, Tiger's learned most of his lessons, and so now when he's being kind of a sexist jerk, it's more frustrating. But as well, I just don't think that the author really has any stories that are necessary to tell in this world. I do like some of the later books because Tiger and Dell have gotten a lot older. I like getting older protagonist experiences, so maybe if the plot looks good, I might pick up more in this series, but for now, I think 8 books is plenty. Okay, then we have The Saga of Recluse by Ellie Modesitt Jr. This is another one. I don't actually know when this series started, but it must have been a long time ago because we're now up to 20-something books in this series, and each one tends to be pretty thick, and I do find them quite heavy and hard to get through. Also, even though a lot of the books are standalones theoretically, there are links between the different books in the series, and at this point, given there's so many books in the series, I don't always remember or appreciate all those links. And again, I just think it's one of those things where there's too many books in the series now, so do I need more? Probably not. So this series is about this world where there is order magic and chaos magic. Order being about stability and things not really changing, and then chaos being about creation and destruction. And throughout the series, there's a lot of talk about the balance between these two. And it's also really interesting because you get perspectives of characters from both sides of the magic, and you can see how in different situations either side can be the bad guy or the good guy. So I really like the philosophy and the ideas in these books. And also about halfway through the series, these people in spaceships crash in this fantasy land and then have to set up kind of their own settlement, and they kind of fit into this magic system in a really interesting way. Like, I love that part, but I think I've had enough at this point. Then we have the Windflower series by Andy Buchanan, who is a New Zealand author that I have really loved some stuff by. The first book in this series is like a cozy fantasy. We're following a couple of witches who live in Wellington in New Zealand, and they're kind of just living like Wellington student life while also learning a little bit about their family's magical heritage. It's very cozy, very low stakes, and I really loved the first book, but cozy fantasy doesn't tend to be my thing. It's just, I am more of a plot-driven reader, and it doesn't tend to have enough of a plot or enough stakes involved. And so when I picked up the second book, that's how I felt. I got kind of bored. I think maybe if I was in a different mood, then maybe I could appreciate it. And there are 4 books in this series, so I could continue. They're also like super short. So like part of me thinks I should continue because I do always enjoy books set in New Zealand and written by New Zealand authors. But also I feel like I'm going to be bored. I kind of feel like the only reason the first book got away with it is because it distracted me by introducing me to new characters and new magic systems. Anyway, I'm going to DNF it, but if you would like to read a short little cozy fantasy set in New Zealand, you can pick this one up. I think it probably holds up. I think the rest of the series is probably fine, if that's what you like. Okay, the next couple are much more popular series. So we have Godkiller by Hannah Kaner. I don't actually know if that's what the series is called, but the first book was called Godkiller. Everybody raved about it. The cover is absolutely beautiful. We follow a few different characters in this world where gods are created through belief, or like stay alive through people believing in them. So it's now illegal to believe in gods because gods have done some pretty terrible, destructive things through the ages. And we're following a god killer who kills gods. We're also following a young child who has a god kind of attached to them. And we're also following like a friend of the prince who's the one who made believing in gods illegal. Anyway, I love the ideas with the gods. Like the concept of how the gods worked was really interesting. But most of the story just seemed like these characters going on a journey, and I was really bored. I didn't really buy a lot of their relationships, especially partway through. It was suddenly like there was a romance budding between 2 of them, and I hadn't seen anything that seemed like that to me. So like, good concept, but just the execution for me wasn't something that I felt attached to. And so for that, I don't really have any interest in continuing. I know I'm going to get FOMO when I see people reading the second book, but I think because I have such differing opinions on the first book that I should try to ignore that FOMO. Then we have Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. So this is a book series that just started last year. It's kind of a spin-off series from the Darker Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab, where we have these 3 different Londons. 4. There's Grey London, that's our London and has no magic. Red, that is like luscious and vibrant with magic. We have White London, which is kind of dying off from a lack of magic. And then Black London, where something went wrong with magic and so it was walled off from the rest of the worlds. So in the first book series, they're kind of dealing with this threat from Black London. And then the spin-off series was kind of, I thought, going to follow new characters who can see the threads of power and do something cool with that. And there is a new character that can do that. But most of that first book focused on the characters from the first series, and kind of it's set 7 years in the future, but then goes back and tells the backstory of everything that's happened to them in the last 7 years. And what's happened to them in the last 7 years? Pretty much nothing. Lots of like backward steps in their character development. I don't know. I think if you really love those characters, which I thought I did, but not enough, I guess, to put up with the amount of backstory, pointless backstory in my opinion, in that new series. And just like everything that was cool in that new series, I didn't feel like was explored enough, and I just don't have confidence that it is going to be explored further in the series. So unless I see the later books in this series getting like rave reviews from people that I know didn't enjoy the first one as much, I'm probably not going to continue. So then we have the Elemental Assassin series by Jennifer Estep. This is another one where I just think there's been too many books in the series. Last year, I finally read the 17th book in the series, which I thought was going to be the final book. But then the author said, I'll probably keep writing things in this world. And I thought, that's not necessary. And I actually think the downfall of that last book is that she tried to bring in all the characters and all the different pieces that she'd had throughout the whole series. She tried to incorporate them all into the last book, and it just meant the last book was completely unfocused, which was quite different from some of the earlier books in the series. So this follows an assassin named Jin as she kind of builds up this found family around her and tries to deal with the crime in the city she lives with, as well as learning about her different elemental magics and her family, which have some connections into the crime community. So all of these books were very formulaic, which is another reason why getting more and more and more does start to get boring. But even though they were formulaic, I used to still really enjoy the action of them and just like They always had so much momentum, so many like cliffhanger chapters, and we were always like learning something new in every book. But after 17 books, it's just not happening anymore. I think I'm done. Then we have The Nightmare Brigade by Frank Villiers and Yongui Dumont. I'm not sure about my pronunciation. So these were a couple of graphic novels. I don't actually know if there's more than 2. I read 2 from my library. Mainly I picked it up based on the cover, and it was a really interesting idea. We follow the scientist who has found a way to send people into other people's dreams, and so when there are teenagers with big traumas, he will send his children. That's debatably not particularly ethical. But anyway, he will send his children into the dreams of these other teenagers, and they will do something in the dream to basically help these teens break out of their trauma. But his children, one of them being adopted, also have some trauma of their own, and there's also some strange things that have happened in the past with the mother being stuck in a dream. So I liked the concept of this, but the storytelling style and the art style just weren't to my preference. It's one of these graphic novels where I found it really hard to follow along with the story. That was especially true in volume 2, where a lot of it is a dream within a dream within a dream, that kind of stuff. Way too complicated. I couldn't keep track of what was going on. And you're kind of not meant to, but I just don't think I enjoyed it enough to continue, or even to look and see if there's more. Then we have The Demon Cycle by Peter V. Brett. This is, I guess, another older-ish fantasy, very popular amongst a certain group of people. Again, I really like the concept. In this world, we have demons that come out as soon as it's dark, but the people of this world have developed this way of staying safe where they write wards or symbols or runes onto their houses or around on the ground. Like there's some travelers that just have like nets basically of these runes that they can put around them to make a little safe space for them. And there's different kinds of demons that can attack in different ways. And there is also actually this other society that's kind of based on like Middle Eastern culture, where they actually go out and proactively fight the demons, and they have weapons with these runes on them. And the first book is called The Painted Man, or The Warded Man in some other areas of the world, because he eventually gets wards all tattooed all over his body. So like the concept is cool, but the way the stories are structured and the way that the characters were developing just wasn't for me. He tends to, with these books, spend like a third of the book with a certain character and then skip to a completely different character for like another third of the book, and then like it's always such big chunks of each character that you almost forget about what was happening with the other character by the time you come back to them. So that was really frustrating. But also, some of the things these characters end up doing is just like really questionable, and it almost seemed like the book was glorifying certain awful behavior. And I particularly wanted to learn more about what was going on with these demons, and that never really seemed to be the direction the story was going in. So I did actually read the first 3 books in this series. Then I tried book 4. I ended up DNFing it because I just couldn't get through the writing anymore, and I was frustrated with spending so much time with characters I didn't like when there were characters I was interested in, but we just weren't getting any of their story. So eventually I just decided it's probably not going to give me what I want, so I think I'm out. Then we have The Roots of Chaos by Samantha Shannon. I actually don't know if she plans to write any more in this world, but if she does, I don't think I'm going to pick it up. So far we've had The Priory of the Orange Tree and then also A Day of Fallen Night. To be honest, both of these books tell the same story, except one is in the future. The first book is in the future, and then the second book is the prequel in the past. But in both circumstances, the characters are discovering the same thing. Basically, dragons are going to come back into the world and they have to deal with it. But in both times, they're coming back in the same way. So it's the same story. Maybe the characters are a little bit different, but they weren't different enough for me. Also, Samantha Shannon has one of these writing styles where she's very descriptive, but in a way, to me, where the descriptions feel empty. I think some people will still really like her writing style, and I know a lot of people do, but for me, I just felt like it was really rambly and took away from the impact that the story could have had. Like when I read that first book, I actually really wanted to rewrite it as a trilogy. So many people raved about how great it was that this was a standalone fantasy, but I think it would have been better as a trilogy in terms of structure and keeping the plot going. Anyway, even though I like dragons, I'm done with the Roots of Chaos series. Okay, then we have the Zodiac Star Force graphic novel series by Kevin Panetta and Paulina I can't pronounce that. Anyway, Zodiac Star Force. I picked this up. I'd seen the art. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's all based around these girls that basically have these like zodiac powers. So they each represent a different zodiac, and I love the colors. The characters kind of look like Gem and the Holograms kind of characters, which was one of my favorite shows when I was younger. And you know, I got colored hair. I thought it looked like it was going to be great. I picked it up. I had no idea what was going on. It really felt like you've been dropped in halfway through the story. Like they already have their powers, they already know what's going on, but they've kind of like broken up their superhero group, and then this is them facing a new threat and getting back together. But because all these characters already know each other and already know their powers, you never get properly introduced to any of them. It isn't even properly explained who's linked to which zodiac sign. And I don't know the zodiac symbols well enough to get it myself. Like, I honestly, when I picked this up, I started reading it and I thought, oh, this is not the first volume. I must have picked up the wrong thing. But no, pretty sure there's nothing else before it. It just starts in the middle of the story. And so I got about halfway through and I thought, I don't care about what's happening because I don't even really know what's happening. So I flicked through, I enjoyed the art, but I don't know, I don't get it. Okay, then we have The Elements of Cadence by Rebecca Ross. So this is a duology, A River Enchanted and A Fire Endless. In A River Enchanted, we basically have this bard coming back to the island that he was raised on to try and help out because all these young girls are going missing. When he gets there, he has to face up with his ex-love interest. There's a forced marriage. There is also this other romance going on. To be honest, my problem with this series is just that it was too focused on the romance. And also, I think I picked this up thinking it was another book. There's another book. I forget what it is. Something to do with a river though. And everyone had described that as being really weird and strange. And I think that's what I thought I was going to get in A River Enchanted. And then it just turned out to be kind of like a Scottish inspired fantasy romance, and I am not a fantasy romance girl, so I shouldn't have picked this series up. There were some interesting things about the magic, so I did actually pick up the second book, and as soon as I got into it, I thought, oh no, this is not for me. So I DNF'd it, and this is one I won't go back to it. But I can see, for this one, how other people would like it. Then we have the Wilderwood series by Hannah Whitten, so the first book being For the Wolf. I'm not sure if this is a duology or if the third book just hasn't been released yet, but we follow this girl and there's some rule where the second sister, the elder sister, some sister of the royal line always has to be like sacrificed to the wolf who lives in this magical forest that kind of borders their land and stops them from going anywhere. And then we follow this girl as she goes there and meets the wolf, who turns out to be this man who's like way older than her. And does it turn into a romance? Yes. I have said before, I really hate age gap romances. It just makes no sense to me when this character that I think is being set up to be like a mentor character because they're so much older and more experienced and like completely different from this young teenage girl with no experience of the world. Like, I just don't get it. Why would you want a romance there? It's gross. As well, the magic was really poorly described, but the overall story was pretty predictable. I did like the side characters. That's the only thing it had going for it, but generally, had a terrible time with this. I did finish the first book just because it was an audiobook and I was reading it for a prompt for a readathon, but if it hadn't been for that, I would have DNF'd the first book. So will I continue on the series? No. Again, it's kind of because it's a fantasy romance thing, but also I didn't like the romance. And also, I just didn't think the fantasy was even at a basic level of good. So yeah, a definite no on that one. So, that's all the books that I DNF'd last year. Let me know if you're mad at me, if you think I should be continuing. The ones at the start of the list, I might be convinced. The later ones, not so much. Also let me know if there's any series that you don't think you're going to be continuing with, and do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.